I'm going to just to start, of course, thanking to the organizers for giving me this opportunity, this chance to talk on a very interesting issue and in a very interesting country. I have to recognize that I was really very happy when I received the invitation to participate in the conference. First, because the initiative, that I think that is a very good one. Second, because the theme, because I really spent a lot of time trying to research and discuss a little bit on the issue of gender and the protection of human rights. And third, because it was the first time that I received an invitation to come to this wonderful country. So I was really very happy. But unfortunately, I'm not able to go there. So that's the second thing that I would like to say, which I really apologize because medical reasons I don't have the opportunity to go to the conference. So, and also, of course, before to start with my presentation, I would like also to thank you, Professor Alexander Stepkowski, because probably he was the person that invited me, and also he was my contact in order to organize this presentation with this tool, which I think is also a very wonderful one. So thank you so much for everything. And I'm going to try to be very systematic in my presentation. As you know, my theme is the gender and the protection of human rights, and I'm going to try to explain three different things. The first one is just to establish some, let's say, not theoretical, but probably conceptual framework in order to explain the meaning of some words that usually we use in our conversation, and the meaning and the reading sometimes is a little bit different. Is the case of the issue of gender, is also the case of equality, is also the case of feminism, and is also the case of human rights. So we usually use the words, but sometimes the reading and the implementation of those words is completely different depending on the setting and also on the, of course, the domestic legislation. The second thing, just when we already have the reference, the theoretical reference, the second thing is to see what happened with international organizations, and especially the organizations that really have an impact in the policy and in the law in the countries in Europe, which is the case of the United Nations, of course, as the unique universal organization, and then also the Council of Europe and the European Union, at least trying to explain the impact of those organizations in the domestic legislation, especially related to gender and human rights, of course. And then finally, the third part, I will try to explain a kind of suggestion or conclusion in order to see what's the meaning of equality and what's the meaning of the exercise of rights by women, which is a language a little bit different than the language that we hear during the last years in the European Union countries. So the first thing is, as I told you before, this conceptual framework, if we can say so, and the first thing is feminism. When we talk about feminism, I know that everything that I'm going to explain needs probably a very more detail in order to explain the meaning of that, but because the time that I have, that I'm going to try to respect, I'm going to say just like a general picture about this issue. So when we talk about feminism as a social movement, I'm thinking on a movement that really promotes equality between women and men. That's the thing. But if, of course, we see what happened historically, taking into account that each country is completely different, the economic background, the political background, the cultural background, the religious background and everything, so it's something that we have to keep in mind. But even though, I think that if we see what happened historically, the real thing is that since the declaration of the independence in the States, and also since the approval of the Declaration of Human Rights in France, we can find some attempts to have like a parallel declaration with the idea to recognize also the rights for women. Is the case, for instance, in France with the declaration proposed by Olympia de Gouges in order to like try to recognize that also women really also have rights. So historically, we cannot deny this attempt since the very beginning. But if we see what happened with the feminism movement as a movement, I think that we can say that there are like 3 different periods of time, let's say. The first feminism, which is in the beginning of the last century, which was probably the most aggressive and radical, if we can use these words, because the situation of women at that time was completely unbalanced if we compare with men. It means that the first idea was try to get the leadership that men have during the whole history and just get this leadership for us, which means that we have to put aside all the obstacles that probably women have in order to get this leadership. It means that the first obstacle is pregnancy, and probably that's the main reason, because in the beginning the feminist movement tried to support the idea of abortion, because it was really an obstacle for women just in order to incorporate them to the public life, if we can say so. So the idea was not just to get the equality, but just to get the leadership, which is a little bit different. Then when in many countries, especially in the West societies, governments decided to recognize the right, especially the right to vote for women, the consequence was that during the second period of the movement, it was a little bit much more moderate if we compare with the first part, because in the first part the idea was, okay, we have to replace man in the society, and the second goal during the second period of time was, okay, we have to try to be equal, which is a little bit much more moderate than in the beginning. And then the situation in which we are now, which is probably the third part of the movement, is a situation in which, especially in Europe, all the policies are just focused on the idea to try to conciliate, or to try, sorry because this word, but try to combine family responsibilities with labor responsibilities, which means that now pregnancy is not a problem. It's a different thing that is only for women, which means, at least biologically, only for women, which means that law and policy have to find an answer or an alternative for women that really would like to work outside of the house and at the same time just try to have a family. So it means that the evolution of the movement is very clear, but the thing that I would like just to underline is that the goal of the movement is equality between women and men. That's the first thing. The second thing is what happened with equality, because we are using the word equality, but what's the meaning of that? The consequence of this idea of feminism during the whole 3 periods, the impact of that on the idea of equality is that in the beginning, the idea of equality is not exactly the same than now, because women is shown like a victim. It was a victim. It was a victim of the discrimination. It was a victim of lack of equality. It was a victim of the unbalanced representation in all areas in the public arena. So the thing is that women pass from the first part, in which is just a victim, to the second one, in which is an active actor of the society. And why is important? Because the situation now during the third time of the movement, of the feminist movement, is that equality is now a goal for the whole society. During the first and the second period, the problem of equality, especially when we are talking about equality between women and men, the problem of lack of equality is just a problem only for women. They have to work with women in order to get equality for women. So it's like if the responsibility is only for this group of society. So the situation now, because all the movement is a little bit different, and from my point of view really very positive, in the sense that equality now is a goal for the whole society. What's the consequence of that is that all the institutions have to work with the idea to promote equality. It's not only the responsibility for women, it's the responsibility for everyone. That's the second idea. The third idea that I would like to underline here is the issue of gender. What happened with gender? Because it depends on the settings that the word is a little bit sensible, let's say. It means that, what's the meaning of gender? When we talk about gender, what are we talking about? Well, in my presentation, or at least with the argument that I'm using, is that when we see what happened with gender, I'm going to use the declaration prepared and approved under the umbrella of the United Nations, especially during the 4th World Conference on Women. As you know, it was in Beijing during the second semester of the year in 1995, and it was a declaration approved by the president of the conference saying that the meaning of the word is the linguistic meaning. Why linguistic meaning? Because there are two different approaches to the idea of gender, the linguistic and the ideological. When we use or at least in the frame in which I'm trying to explain this, when we use the word gender, we are talking about it's not a movement, it's just a definition of the lack of equality because cultural reasons. When in the 60s, mainly in the American universities, they started to create the departments for women's studies, the thing was that when they started to see what happened with women, they need a reference, what happened with men. The consequence of that is that there is a need to compare the situation of both, and the consequence was that in many societies the differences between women and men are just not biological differences but just cultural differences, which means that really, culturally speaking, there is a lack of equality, and this is the gender. When we talk about gender, we are talking about the differences built up because the culture of the society, not because there are really biological differences between both. Okay, so the problem is that within the feminist movement, there is a small group of academics, especially from the USA. Probably the leader, we could say, is Professor Judy Butler, that really are thinking that even if women and men are born equal, biologically speaking are different, but are equal as human beings. But the thing is that even with the difference, each one could build up the sexual identity and the sexual orientation, because both of them are cultural constructions. So this is a specific reading on gender that I'm not going to use here, because I think that this is part of this ideological meaning that the president of the Conference of Women in 1995 says, which means that when we talk about gender, I'm talking about cultural reasons or cultural arguments in order to defend the differences and the role of women and men in society. So the last theoretical question that I would like to explain, also very brief, is the idea of human rights. It's very easy today just to talk on human rights. Everybody has the right to do whatever they want. But the thing is that when we use the word right, I think that it's important to clarify the meaning and the content of the right. I mean, it's important because when we talk about the rights, we are talking about the institutional implications that are completely different if we talk about policies. And especially not only because rights and policies are two different things, especially because when we talk about policies, we are talking about the governmental commitment to invest human resources and economic resources. But when we talk about the right, if we keep in mind the proposal made by the UN, it means that institutionally, all the institutions have to respect, to protect, to promote, and to achieve the rights, which means that you need specific tools to do that. And I'm just trying to underline this because it has a very important impact in the implementation of the rights. For instance, taking into account the idea of the universality of the rights, which is the position of the European Union, that human rights are universals, and also that not only the European Union, but also the United Nations during the Conference on Human Rights in Vienna in 1993, and then in all the documents after that, the position was just the idea that human rights are universal. It means that there are no specific rights for a specific group of people. For instance, it's very easy if we think, for instance, on persons with disabilities. A person, for instance, who is not able to see. This person and myself, we have exactly the same right to education. Exactly the same, because the right to education is the same for everyone. But the exercise of the right is different, because the person who is not ready to see needs specific tools and instruments in order to ensure the exercise of the right. And I don't need specific tools just to read or to drive a car. It means that the right is exactly the same. The right to education, the entitlement of the right is exactly the same. The differences are coming when we go to the second step, which is the exercise of the right. That's the reason, in order to defend the universality, because in the European Union the position always was that there are no women's rights. There are rights exercised by women. In the case of health, and especially on sexual health, when we talk about the situation of women and men, the protection is for the right to health during the whole life cycle, which means that the exercise of the right could be different in the case of women and men, because the needs of both of them will be different. But the right is the same. I mean, women really, I don't think that we are going to find any international instrument saying that women have different rights. Even when we check what happened with the Convention on Discrimination Against Women approved by the Assembly, the General Assembly of the UN, we are not going to find specific rights. We are going to find how to ensure the exercise of the rights by women. And this is not an academic issue, because especially in the issue of abortion, which is probably the most sensitive one when we discuss the role of women and men, if we accept this idea that abortion is only a decision by women, we are going back to the feminism from the last century, in the sense that we are just moving everything to the origin of the movement, in which equality and the problems for women are only for women, leading by women, in association with women, and men are completely aside, which means that we are going to be very far away from the real situation, in which really the efforts, especially from the Council of Europe and the European Union, is try to get inside with us men, which are completely outside of the debate on equality. So, I mean, we can talk about that. I mean, probably we can organize another conference to explain and to debate in this particular issue. But just only like a small light here, or a flash, I would like to underline the idea that there is no specific right for women. The only instrument that really in some cases recognize sexual and reproductive rights as such is the Convention on the Rights for Persons with Disabilities, and I think that it has also a lot of explanation about the debate behind. I have just to repeat only that in the case of Europe, in the case of the Council of Europe especially, there is no one specific right to sexual and reproductive health, because the reading was that sexual and reproductive health is one part of the right to health. So just more or less with this clarification about what happened with the theoretical approaches, we need to know what happened in the international organizations. In the UN, I think that we can say so for all the international organizations. All the organizations have like a double track to work, legal side and political side. In the majority of the cases, the legal side doesn't imply that automatically we are going to get equality between women and men. So we need policies. I mean, we need both things. In the UN, we have the convention that I say before from 1979, and then the optional protocol approved later on. In the case of the Council of Europe, we have the Convention on the Rights and Fundamental Freedoms that was approved in Rome in 1950, plus the Social Charter that was approved recognizing social rights in 1960. And in both cases, we have an important work in the legal side and also an important work in the political side. In the case of the UN, as you probably know, there is a committee that was created by the convention with the idea to have some independent experts that they receive the mandate to review all the reports submitted by the states when they ratify the convention. So the decisions of this committee are not legal implications, let's say, in the sense that the committee usually prepares some suggestions in order to apply in a better way the convention. So there is no specific mandate from the committee or from CEDAW in order to approve abortion. When you check what happened with the recommendations of the committee, all the recommendations are just saying in the cases, in some countries in which they have abortion, the goal is that abortion will be in a safe and healthy way. But there is no one specific mandate to the committee to oblige to any state to change the domestic legislation. I think that this is a very important thing from the legal point of view. And then, politically speaking, as you know, in the case of the UN, now there is a specific entity, UN Women, which really is the entity with the mandate to work for equality between women and men, and also to introduce this idea of gender mainstreaming as something which is like a cross-cutting issue in all the policies approved in the UN, and I think that is important. And then all the main organs of the UN are now working on the issue of equality between women and men. Even the Security Council, that really doesn't have competences to do so, since 2000 they approved some resolutions on women and armed conflict, which I think that is a very, very important thing. In the case of the Council of Europe, as I told you before, there is a convention with a specific article protecting life, but also with Article 14 protecting the idea of equality and non-discrimination between women and men. And then there are some decisions approved by the European Court on Human Rights on this area, but there is no specific mandate on the particular issue of abortion. In the case of the European Union, that's a very interesting issue, especially because the European Union really doesn't have the mandate to work on this issue. When we see what happened in the European Union, the mandate for this organization, as you know, is mainly economic and labor market, mainly. Then there are other issues in which the European Union tried to get a political common position in order to discuss the issue with other regional groups. Is the case, for instance, in the UN, when the European Union has to speak aloud only with one voice on behalf of the 27 states. But in the case, I'm thinking, for instance, now, I really don't know if I was lucky or unlucky, but in any case I was there when the UN proposed to check and to review what happened with the issue of prostitution as a way to qualify as violence against women or not. And I remember that in the European Union at that time it was a very interesting debate, because in one country in the European Union, domestically, they changed the criminal code in order to increase the punishment for the people that use the commerce of prostitution. So the idea was try to criminalize a little bit more stronger the people working on that. The owners of the business for prostitution. At the same time that in other countries in the European Union, the decision was integrate the workers of the prostitution into the social security system. So it means that the European Union really doesn't have the mandate to work also in these issues. Yes, politically speaking, the idea is try to find a consensus, but sometimes it's very complicated. We can say more or less the same thing with other international organizations. In the Organization of American States and also in the African Union, they are working also with this double track, politically and also legally speaking. But the thing that I would like just to show to you is that we are not going to find any specific rights for women in any of the international instruments, legal instruments, probably because really politically speaking, the goal in many countries always is just try to keep the universality of the rights. So just clarifying more or less what happened with the theoretical approaches and then what happened with the international organizations, the last thing that I would like to say, just in order to propose a kind of suggestion or conclusion, or I mean you can choose the word that you like it, but the thing is that there are no specific rights for women. The position or the conclusion, when we follow more or less all the arguments that I try to explain to you, is that when we talk about women, we are talking about the exercise of the rights by women. Then sexual and reproductive health is part of the right to health, because internationally speaking, the protection is for their health during the whole life cycle. And the last thing that I would like to say is that ideologically speaking, when we try to say that I mean, my body is really mine, so I can do whatever I want, I think that probably we have to reflect a little bit about the capitalist consequence of that, because at the end we are using this argument to say, well, when I'm the owner of something, I can do whatever I want. But in the case of the unborn, we can check what happened with the decisions in many international decisions. We can see that the unborn in some cases has the protection because it's a possible embryo or is a feto that we have to protect. So I think that legally speaking, it is very difficult to keep both positions. And at the end, even if I'm completely in favor to underline that really the future belongs to women, I'm completely sure about that. But even though I think that it's important to keep very clear the legal meaning of the words that we are using. So I think that it's important to maintain, as the European Union does now and also during the past, to maintain policies promoting equality and promoting this idea of gender as a cross-cutting issue, but at the same time it's important also from the legal point of view to maintain the idea of the universality of the rights. Otherwise, I think that we are going to find a lot of risks that at the end are not really good to protect or to have a better society. So I think that it's important to protect the rights, especially for women, not because women really need a special protection, but yes, because if we really achieve better protection of human rights for women, we will have a better protection of human rights for the whole society. Thank you so much.